To
Hey, BookTube. Noah, everyone who reads it must converse. I got Yasmin at To the Lit House right here.
Hi.
Una from the Codex Cantina in the house. And we are here to do a special discussion of As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. Bam. There's the man of the hour. Very cool. Happy birthday, first of all, to Flannery O'Connor, one of my favorite Southern Gothic authors. I love her so much. And she had actually said that As I Lay Dying, we don't need any of that. As I Lay Dying is her favorite Faulkner novel. Mm-hmm. So I was supremely excited to get to it, and it was a really cool reading experience and discussion.
So he planned this whole event to be around her birthday and her favorite. Exactly. This was Noah's birthday present to her.
That's right. Happy birthday, Flannery. Yeah, I didn't, but I'll take credit for it. And there is a new Flannery O'Connor documentary that just dropped, and it's available public access, like PBS, GPTV is what it here is in Georgia. Just public access channels that kind of push that out. That it got picked up, and I hear it's really, really good. So
that's nice.
If you don't know, check it out. It's a bio.
Right on, right on.
Life is really interesting. Sorry, Una.
Very cool. So how do you want to start this off? Let's get to it.
I was going to say we started off with Flannery, but maybe we should move into some William Faulkner. Maybe. Now, in terms of how many times we've read it, I think everybody knows out there I'm quite the Faulknophile. Read a lot of his books. This was definitely not my first pass through. I want to hear from you two. I believe, can you guys share whether this was your first Faulkner and what your initial reactions were to it?
For sure. I defer to
ladies first. There we go.
All right. That's okay. This was my first novel by Faulkner. I had read a couple short stories by him. One of them is Barn Burning, and the other one I can't remember. Might have been A Rose for Emily. So this one was my first novel, and I didn't really know what to expect. I had heard some things about how he played with stream of consciousness and stuff like that. And I had heard terms like Southern Gothic being thrown around, but I didn't really know what it meant because I haven't really read much of Southern Gothic. But this was amazing. I really, really loved it. And I already told you guys I want to just read everything by Faulkner now.
Right. Yeah, nice. Very cool. So, the kind of hype around Faulkner is awesome. There's a month, dedicated to reading Faulkner, championed by you and you, Una, and Alan at Big Heart Books and Classics, Brian at Bookish. Faulkner is definitely somebody who is heralded in bookish community. So I was excited about it for sure, and especially because it is Flannery O'Connor's favorite. And I have an author friend that told me that we were talking, I said how much I love Flannery, and we were just kind of talking Southern Gothic stuff and Cormac McCarthy, this kind of gritty stuff. And he goes, yeah, well, Faulkner did it the best. And I was like, really? He goes, man, Faulkner did it the best, hands down. So I went into it with expectations really high, and I was not disappointed when it comes down to it. There's something to be said about reading quote unquote difficult books with other people, because it becomes something that you enjoy the talk. There's more substance to talk about when nobody knows what's going on. You're talking and you're throwing out ideas, and this kind of thing becomes part of the pleasure of reading. And that was very much apparent in this read through. We were having so much fun with the talking, and on revisiting that, I was like, we were throwing out ideas, all kinds of ideas after the first 5, 6, 10 chapters, trying to kind of get our bearings and put everybody in their place in relation to each other. And it's just with something that is so is delivered in a way that is not straightforward. That's part of the fun. It was so cool.
Yeah. How would you so let's say someone was like, should I start with As I Lay Dying? And I know you guys have only read that one. That would be a different question for you guys to answer. But let's say to this person, you had to describe, okay, people say Faulkner's different, but there's lots of different ways that a author can present something as difficult. And sometimes they don't mean for it to be difficult. It's just their style. It's in their
Right.
DNA. It's how they want the story to come out. If the story is in you, it must come out. A quote from William Faulkner himself.
Nice.
How would you guys describe, not necessarily what makes it difficult, but what made this to you guys like, wow, this is what Faulkner's all about as you went into it? Like, what were you just like, okay, Faulkner, I see what you're doing here?
Good question.
You want it first, or you want to go? You want to think about it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go
Well, when I saw how the chapters were laid out and that we were getting very personal, consciousness within each character, their take on the activity that was going on, then I was like, okay, this is a guy who's not only definitely ambitious, but also very confident in his ability to do what it is that he wants to do. This kind of thing was fun from page one, and something that I thought, okay, I see what you're doing here. You're trying to, you're going to give it to me. Yeah. You're going to piece it out. You're going to piece it out to me, and you're giving me a lot to mull over, and active reading is required, and I love that stuff. Love it. So I was like, dude, he's right in my wheelhouse.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that, and I'm someone who loves the stream of consciousness style, and also getting into characters' heads, and this was super interesting to read. Like Noah said, all the different perspectives, and some of these perspectives were really, really unique. I mean, we'll get into that later, but one of them was from a kid's perspective, and that was a very unique point of view, with all the innocence and all of that. So it was really interesting to see how he explored very complex and dark themes through this perspective and with these characters. In terms of whether I would recommend it as someone's first Faulkner, I would say, yeah, just try it out. I mean, we loved it as a first Faulkner, so why not?
Yeah, completely.
And it's worth disclaiming too. So 15, 20 years ago, when my first Faulkner piece was this one. So it's very fitting that I get to come back and get to share that experience with you guys. It's really cool.
That's cool. And you share it with two that are experiencing it as their first Faulkner.
Right.
That's cool. Very cool.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, something you guys both kind of alluded to was the multiple perspectives, right?
Sure.
Each chapter, is it okay to call it chapter? Like, they're not even labeled chapter 1, chapter 2. It's
and some of them are so short. One of them is one sentence,
5 words.
Right.
the longest being 7 pages. Right. So you've got 59. I'm gonna call them chapters, but they're kind of experiences, right? This is Darl. This is Vardeman, and you enter into a certain perspective, that character, a certain perspective, I guess, in a sense. You said something there about changing perspectives and stuff like that. The perspectives is something I think we talked a lot about as we read this book, of they kind of change through this book. And then sometimes you have these italics and it's just like, well, this doesn't feel like we're in this character's mind anymore either.
Right.
How would you describe what Faulkner's trying to do here? Or what do you think he's trying to do with like these different perspectives and how you enter in and out with these italics? Like, what is even happening? Like, when you talk about ambition, it's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. It's totally great. And that's kind of what I wanted to touch on when I'm talking about like the structure of this novel, because Darl becomes like a surrogate narrator. You know what I mean? For Faulkner in a big way, where he can see not just other things that are going on with other people that are in the narrative, but then he's just kind of an almost an omniscient deliverer of narrative in his perspective, in his respective chapters. So there's multiple perspectives, and time itself is repeated from different perspectives as it goes, but also time is not delivered in a straightforward way all the time. Most of the time it is, but sometimes, especially in that unbelievable Addie chapter, You're
Out
like,
of nowhere. Out
is
of
this
nowhere.
a
Out of
flashback?
nowhere.
Is this a flashback, or is, because if it's now, well, she's in the in the void somewhere. But
Mm-hmm.
so like, what is going on? But what a great chapter to give you some perspective as to the family dynamic, and also what has shaped some of these children's thoughts. This is their mother and things like that.
Yeah,
It's
it was
amazing what he does here.
unbelievable. Yeah, and you talked about Darl, so we talked a bit about Darl when we were talking about the book as we were reading it, and it's still not clear to me whether it was Faulkner in there or it was Faulkner giving Darl a special ability, you know?
Right.
And so there's that I'm still confused about, and I'm confused about many things when it
Right.
comes to this book. And then as to your question, Una, what do I think that Faulkner is trying to do? And I don't know, but I think that it might be that he was just saying, well, what is true for any given event, and he sort of took the collection of all these people's thoughts and the same scene from different perspectives and from different angles, and said, okay, well, the truth is this, just all of this from different perspectives. It's all of it, and it's messy and complicated, but this is what
Right.
it is.
Do you think that's part of like a subjective versus objective experience?
Yes. And
Mhm.
I think that that's where the question of what he was trying to do with Darl's character comes in. And like I said, I'm not really sure, like whether it was him trying to give an objective perspective or just giving a character with a subjective perspective the ability to look at a scene, or to look at everything that's happening. So are we still
Right.
getting Darl and his subjective perspective, or is that objective?
Yeah, no, one of my favorite things when we were reading this book was listening to, I think you kept coming back, and I love that you kept coming back. I liked hearing the journey, but you kept coming back to, why is this book called As I Lay Dying? Because to your point, why do we hear from Addie after she's dead? She's a character all along the way, right? She's
Mm-hmm.
in the box that Kat is, laying down on, right?
So if you want to picture it.
She's on the cover.
Right.
We hear her body decomposing, and then all of a sudden we get a narrative chapter in the middle of the book. But you
Yes.
guys bring up, but we made Darl kind of the main central consciousness of this novel, where
Right.
19 of the 59 chapters are from Darl's or a pseudo Faulkner's perspective. I didn't want to bring it up as you were reading because I didn't want to, change your mind. But now that we're talking about it, do you know where that title, As I Lay Dying, came from?
So I can start with some of the things that I was saying as I was reading it. So the first thing that I thought was, okay, as I lay dying, Addie's perspective, in the first few chapters, if we're calling them chapters, she's dying, and then finally she dies. And then this entire novel is about her family taking her body from where they're at to this town called Jefferson, which is where she was born and grew up, which is what she wanted. And so it's about what happens as she's just laying there in her coffin that Cash made for her. But it's mainly about everything that isn't her. It's about this. It's about her family and what they are going through. So her taking her body to Jefferson is like Faulkner's sort of excuse, I would almost call it, to talk about everybody else. So while I still see As I Lay Dying as, coming from Addie, it's still As I Lay Dying, everything else, all of this happened, and that's what's important, if that makes sense. But I don't know how I would take the most of the chapters coming from Darl.
Very cool. Isn't it from a John Keats poem?
It's from Homer's The Odyssey.
Nice.
So the quote is, "As I lay dying, the woman with the dog's eyes would not close my eyelids for me as I descended into Hades."
Nice.
So
So
Faulkner is really well known for making many Greek references.
Nice.
There's some critics that even said Faulkner is Greece when it comes to what his writing is, because he'll take a lot of influence from these Greek epic poems and stories, and he doesn't make illusions. He's a better writer than just reproducing a story, but
Right.
he takes that passion, that drive that was behind these characters and infuses it into his, and almost kind of like reimagines it in a sense.
Nice. I mean, it's something that true artists do. You know what I mean? Take a story, an epic or immortal kind of story, and reimagine it, and then just go through whatever. I mean, same thing that Joyce did with Ulysses, right? Even more pointed with the same text.
I wouldn't know. I still haven't tackled that beast yet.
Oh,
he made
you're
It's
gonna
too
love it.
scary, man.
You are gonna love it. It is intimidating and it is scary, but yeah, it's awesome. So let's just put. I wanna put all the characters on the table for
Mhm.
everybody who's there and kind of give our impressions of the characters, and then we'll talk about some of the plot, because is this plot driven? Not exactly. Is it character driven? Maybe
Mm,
it could be
yeah.
argued, but it is something of a whole different beast when it comes down to it. So, um, the family is, and I mean, family dynamics play a kind of subtextual role in this. It's so cool to see how these family members are interacting, and Anse, who at first, for like 5 or 7 chapters we know as Pa, but then we get an Anse chapter and we know that this is the dad. Throughout this shows himself to be, to me, completely a user. You know what I mean? He's the head of the household, but he's a user. And just when we meet him, the fact that he can't sweat or he'll die, and it's not just that this is the narrative that is put through the family, but
Mhm.
Darl, who is our surrogate narrator for Faulkner, actually says that Anse believes that himself. He's already said it so many times that he actually believes it. This is how he operates. You know what I mean? And it's just he's living what is I guess, quote unquote, a luxurious life compared to the other members of his family, when they're all just dirt poor anyways, you know what I mean, and struggling for the day to day. But he's able to just go from dawn till dusk, just kind of chilling out. um Y'all want to add some to Ants? Your take on Ants? I want to get all the main characters kind of out on there.
I would just say he's all words and no action, just because I know that'll be relevant later. But
Right,
yeah, that's mainly Anne's what you said.
right. He's all talk, and a lot of what he does say shows itself to be, you know, uh, veiled at
Mhm.
best and deceitful at worst. You know what I mean? He just is getting people to do what he wants them to do, that kind of thing. And then we have in the family, of course, Addie. She's the one that dies early, but Jewel is this beast of a man. Really. I mean, he's just tall, he's big, and he gets stuff done. And we had said from the beginning that he's angry, or just kind of a angsty, maybe a hateful man, that kind of stuff. But we failed in I think in a way to understand that what this every single person in this book should be in a state of grief and mourning. Who is? Hardly nobody is. It's so weird how lightly this death of the mother, the matriarch of the family, is taken, and how everybody just keeps on doing their jobs and going on about what needs to be done. When it comes down to it, Joel may be the only one who is actually inwardly affected a lot by the death of Addie, and he's dealing with that, and it manifests as lashing out. It manifests as this kind of, screw you, man, because
Mhm.
Well, what would you say? No, I know you live kind of, you know more about the Southern life. Would you say you've probably heard the term that the Southern life is the history of Southern life is a story of violence, right? Sometimes Anse's way to avoid or to resolve conflict is maybe his words. Okay. Jules is his actions. He's the one that uses violence to solve everything.
Right. Well, he is definitely aggressive, and but I think that when it comes down to it, it's just like you said there. There's that Jewel is like this man of action that just is, you know, when he comes up against a problem, when he comes up against something that's even a frustration or even a minor inconvenience, he acts, and maybe in a way that isn't the, you know, the best way to handle a situation or something like that, but he makes stuff happen.
Yeah.
And we see that throughout, I guess.
And he's opposite to Anse in that way, that he immediately reacts and is violent. And I would say that they're all affected in some way. I don't know about all of them, but some of them. One of the comments, I wasn't able to finish reading it, but said that Vardeman was, you know, affected by Addie's death, and I agree with that. They all seem to cope in a different way. So maybe Jules' way of coping was more apparent just because, you know, he was aggressive. But Vardeman, well, we're going to probably talk about his famous chapter, My Mother's a Fish, and all of that. But each of them, I feel like, are coping in different ways.
Right. It's very cool that you brought that up too, Una, that like Ants and Jewel being like opposites to each other, and I think it's valid. And I had seen that like Cash and Darl are like maybe two sides of of the same coin there, because Cash is like this really utilitarian. Cash is the one that is building his mother's coffin there. He's a very dexterous, you know, a good carpenter, and he brings a lot of utility and value to this family. You know, I mean, he's going to build a barn for the Toll family, and he brings a lot to the table. And Darl is this one that doesn't bring a lot to the table and lives in his mind, lives in a you know, kind of ethereal kind of world, and is not seen as productive, and is seen as, you know, a useless, you know, maybe even somebody who is kind of sucking on what the family has without providing anything to do it. So, but Darl and Cash are the two older brothers. Cash being the oldest there, and Darl being the second. So, you know, as far as two brothers that are close in age, it would be understandable that they would be opposites of each other in a way, because that's how people do. That's how kids do, because they want to differentiate themselves from their siblings. It's just family dynamics in that kind of way. But it's very cool, the Jewel and Ants dichotomy that goes on, because there is a lot of tension there. There is multiple times where Ants directly tells Jewel what to do, and Jewel, you know, has his own ideas. And there's times where Jewel does stuff without saying anything about it, and you know, the family just has to kind of accept, kind of like he's, you know, he's a man. He's one that, you know, when he makes a decision and he does something, you have to live with it. Kind of like Anse's horrible decisions. It's ridiculous. So then we got Dewey, Dell, and Vardeman, and that's the end of the family there. Dewey Dell is the youngest daughter and the only daughter in this family that I see as a tragic character, that's for sure.
Oh yeah.
And Vardeman as this young boy that is the innocent voice, and this kind of trying to find meaning. And maybe there's also a dichotomy there, like an innocence in experience.
Well, they were described as the not, so Dewey Dell was the not Jewel. And Vardeman was the boy to replace the one that was robbed from Addie. right? We talked about that chapter in Hattie's chapter.
Right.
So I almost kind of wonder sometimes, like, what was the order that Faulkner created these characters? And these two almost even like even in their purpose of being the not Jewel, like the negative of Jewel, and then the replacement for the child that was robbed, they almost seem like they were created last. And like it's almost like to me, Faulkner started with these first three. These were my strong three characters that I knew how they're going to have a dynamic. And then almost these two kind of got tacked on later, it almost feels like.
Sure. I definitely see that.
Yeah, and a lot of the times that we hear from Vardeman and Dewey Dell, it's them reacting to things that are happening. They're almost never the cause, you know, like a
They don't have
character
much
like Jewel, for example.
what's it called?
Agency.
Right.
Agency.
Dewey Dell and Vardeman are both just
Yeah,
kind of helpless. You know, they're along for the ride,
exactly.
and just
And
they can't affect anything to happen.
yeah, and there's a chapter where Vardeman is crying, and help me out because I can't really remember the scene that well, but he's crying and he feels like the crying is too loud or something. He escapes, he goes past the barn and then starts crying there and breaking down, and he hits a horse or something like that. And then Dewey
Peabody's
Dell
theme,
finds him. Yeah, and then shakes him, and she says, I didn't know that I had that strength in me. I'm shaking the both of us, which she could be talking about Vardaman or, you know, the baby, which we can talk
Right.
more about. So there's also this shared thing between Vardaman and Dewey Dell.
Yeah, because they shared beds even.
Right. Yeah, both being the youngest, and this family's really poor. How many rooms do they got, really? You know, there's probably some bed sharing going on all over the place because there's just not means to make things happen. So the story there, you know, we have this almost like a heroic journey to bury the dead mother that turns out to be completely a clusterfuck. I mean, sorry but for real, it turns out to be just completely. I mean, what is happening here? And
Everything goes as planned. Everything goes as planned.
and I mean the multiple perspectives of it are super effective because everybody has their own motivations for going where they're going. You know, Jewel jumps on his horse. He's right at home, baby. Anse wants to go get his teeth. Dewey Dell needs to solve a problem that she's got. Vardeman wants to take a look at this nice shiny train in the shop window. And Cash is really the only one.
He wanted the graphophone or whatever, right?
Right. That's right. Christy Louise Dostoevsky in space got at me on that one. Yeah, but it's bad. It's so bad. Like what happens? So, there's 4 days. Okay, it's a storm. They set out, and setting out, we've already seen the kind of things that we've touched on. Jules, you know, like walking a thin line between, you know, letting Darl have it or anybody in the family have it anyways, really. And you know, all of our characters are loaded up, and it's been a huge storm, and they go to where they're going to bury Addie, and they can't get across this river. 4 days of going down and staying at a neighbor's house. Who knows how friendly they are? Everybody knows that Anse is completely incompetent and totally, you know.
Oh yeah.
Addie got her deliverance by not having to put up with Anse anymore. But then they have to go back up because there's just no way to cross this river. It's flooded. It's too high. And they get back up to the Toll residence, who is our friends of the family, Cora and Vernon Toll. They're friends of the family, and they decide to go across this ford of the river that's still completely flooded over, but they know it's under there, and they think they can, you know, go across it. And I mean, it's a bad decision from the start. Even from the first reading, you saw the decision making is not on point, and who's making the decision? Ultimately, Anse, for sure. And so they attempt it. And this kind of thing is our first, I think, climax of the story, where we see everybody kind of coming into their own, and we learn a whole lot more about what these characters are all about. And I'll just say, first off, just to start it off, what does Anse do? He stands over there and watches everybody do everything.
He uses his words, right? You go do that.
And I mean, even when the tragedy strikes, I mean, even when, you know, they don't get across the river easily, let me tell you, and it's totally ridiculous. But he doesn't help in the doing, and he doesn't help in the aftermath. He doesn't help in any kind of way. But let's explore that a bit if y'all got any thoughts on it. That's for sure.
I'll say this as a returning reader, I absolutely remember that scene, and that scene is actually one of the most famous in all of literature. Like, if you read As I Lay Dying, everybody remembers the Ford scene. Like, the Ford scene is just it's the symbolic, it's the emotional, it's the plot center of this book upon which everything revolves, right? Once you cross that bridge, is there any going back?
Right. No.
Right.
No way.
Symbolically, once they cross that bridge,
Right.
don't we change so much of what these characters are, or what it means to them?
It does. It changes their whole dynamic, because their mules die, the team dies. Cash is completely not just hurt, but incapacitated, and laid on the coffin for pretty much the rest of the novel here, and it's crazy. But what I think
some would even say he's laid on his own cross.
Right. And you know, his only solace is his tools, right?
Yeah, which are scattered all over. And yes, so Cash's chapters are really interesting. So the first one that we get is almost like instructions on how to build something, and they don't really make sense. But then his chapters change in terms of the style. They get more philosophical and very existential. And so, yeah, he's the one that probably changes the most in terms of style, I think. And like you were mentioning earlier, Noah, he was a carpenter, so he depended on his ability to do work, and that was his value within that family. And then once he was incapacitated, he was a completely different person.
Right.
I think he's also close to 33 too. I don't know his exact age, but he's close to Jesus's age. He's the carpenter.
Right. And like Leslie from the Nerdy Narratives had said earlier, that Cash suffers the most out of anybody in this novel.
Oh yeah.
And I don't doubt it. I mean, you know, when it comes down to it, he's sitting there in pain the whole time, and we haven't even scratched the surface of what they do to him. It's ridiculous.
No, my gosh.
It was so endearing, just to wrap this up, because it's horrible, a horrible idea. The execution was not done, was not well, but also afterwards, the aftermath, there we saw the first time where this family like came together over something, and it was Cash. It was getting his tools out of the river, and these things were, it's not just that it was like, you know, we love Cash so much that we're going to do this for him. It was because these tools are valuable. Cash is completely valuable. I'm not saying that there's no love there, but there is definitely this sense of utility and worth that needs to be protected and gotten back. This kind of stuff. They talk about how he just bought these tools, you know, they're brand new kind of stuff. But we see the family, and by the family, I don't mean Anse. because Toll Toll is in the water searching for the tools, Vernon, and Anse is out there just watching it happen. You know what I mean? So it's Toll and it's Darl and it's Jewel, and I just see Jewel on his horse, just crushing it.
Well, do you remember how they got Addie out?
Didn't they rope to the
Jewel, right?
wagon
It was
and
Jewel.
pull it? Yeah, pull him with the horse.
Single-handedly, Jewel saved her.
Right. Yeah, Jewel.
The same way that he put her into the wagon, and the same way that he saved her again.
Right. Yeah, Jewel is just a beast of a guy, that's for sure. And there's a lot to be said about how when he does something, he'd rather do it alone. You know.
Yeah.
He's not looking to be part of a team. He's a one-man army. It's ridiculous. I don't know.
Are we bringing up the Addie quote now, or are we saving that?
Well, yeah, we can bring it up because after the river scene, because they get across the river, even though they're completely destroyed, like, you know, their team is dead. The wagon is in bad shape, but still usable. But there's that whole scene where Anse just goes and does his thing to get a new team. Goes in and what does he do?
He's trading with the Snopes.
Trading with the Snopes. That's right. So he goes and trades with the Snopes, which is you know, a bad deal, but at least he gets what he needs. And he's not giving anything of himself except for mortgaging some of his equipment, but he gives Jules' horse. He promises Jules' horse anyways. But this is a requirement. They have to get Addie in the ground. It's already been 4 days. And then yeah, after that, they get suited up with a new team. Jewel actually, and this is how I saw that he had a sense of honor there, that he goes and gives his horse to the Snopes himself. He's pissed because Anse used his property, his horse, as you know, part of his negotiation. But he's part of this family. He loves his mother. This is his duty, and he goes and gives his horse up so that the family can move on in their quest. And then we have that Addie chapter that is completely mind-blowing.
And it's worth, before we go into that, it's worth adding for the people that do go on to read more Faulkner works that the Snopes are an extremely important family to the Yoknapatawpha County because they have a whole trilogy of books that revolve around them. And it all revolves around them making kind of like that Faustian deal where they always kind of screw someone over and greed for themselves. But it's also kind of like that tale of the South of usually they look out for themselves. How do I get the better of this? And to your point about how that's counterbalanced with Jewel of he's in a bad place, but he still has, to your point, some honor to the Bundren bloodline. He still commits to his father's terrible deals,
right?
As he, you know, gives up the horse who they've referred to many times. Jewel's mother is the horse, right?
Right.
Yeah, and also if it's gonna happen, it's gonna be him who does it, and it's gonna be in his own terms or in his own way, like he's been doing everything in the book.
Right. As I saw how it comes down to, you know, Vardeman is trying to make sense of what's going on, and he says, you know, my mother's a fish, and Jules' mother being a horse. Vardeman says that kind of thing, but it is like him trying to relate, you know, what people love, what people have lost after loving. You know, it was a win for Vardeman to catch that big fish and come and show everybody, and then he killed it, and he did it himself. Anse told him to go clean the fish. So you know, that's his kind of frame for looking at death. And so it's really, really cool how many different ways that Faulkner brings out looking at death, life, different situations, how we experience stuff.
Right.
from all different ages.
Yeah, from different perspectives, different characters, and it's also huge ideas um, being talked about by this kid. Like I was saying, so my mother is a fish. Like you said, he's bringing it back to what he can relate to. He killed a fish, and now his mother's dead. So my mom must be a fish, and it brings up really, really deep question of, are two things the same if they go through the same thing?
Right.
And it can be easy to just read that and go, oh, okay, he's a kid and he's just saying that. But aren't really two things the same if they go through the same thing?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And then with Jewel, again, he's relating it to what he knows. So.
And what he says, and also a big thing of Vardeman is that kind of thing where he's like, my brother, Jules, my brother. He's like this. Darl's my brother. He's like that. So they're both different, but they're both my brother. And, just kind of just trying to figure all this kind of stuff out. And we'll get to where he's talking about,
I remember that he said, there's a couple examples where he says, my mother is a fish. Jules' mother is a horse.
It's a horse.
Jules, my brother. My mother is a horse.
Right.
Right. And language is a really tricky thing in this book as well. And when he was saying that, I was also thinking of when Darl uses the is and the was. So my mother, she was Addie. So now she isn't because she's dead. So her state changed essentially. And I did notice that he calls her Ma when he's talking about when she's alive, but when he's referring to the corpse, he says Addie, right? So he calls her different things. And when Vardeman is asking himself, like, well, how can Jewel be my brother if my mother is a fish and Jewel's mother is a horse, and Darl has no mother because he doesn't think that Addie is any longer? Well, Addie was their mother when she was alive, but after she died, she was converted into a completely different thing. So it makes sense for her to be different things to different people. She's no longer Addie.
And to Darl, the nothing.
Do you remember around those chapters when we first started getting the my mother is a fish? Do you remember what Dewey Dell referred to her body as?
Her own body?
Yeah.
Or body?
Her own body.
I don't.
She said, I'm a tub of guts.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. And then if
she was talking about Peabody, the doctor.
Yeah.
He's a big tub of guts. I'm a little tub of guts.
And then do you remember too that at that time too, it's real interesting how Vardeman, he's worried that he knows his mom's dead, right? My mom is a fish. He knows that. He associates that in a weird way. And then he's worried about her not being able to breathe or something and drills holes into her coffin and then even drills into her face. Like
that's horrible.
It's awesome. And it's so grotesque. That's the Southern Gothic done to the hilt right there. It's so good. Where, the kid is just this innocent kid that's like, my mom can't breathe in there. Why are you going to seal her up? And then bores holes in it and ends up boring holes through his dead mother's face. It's like, oh, wild.
And a lot of the characters just seem to have like this pontification of what does it mean to be alive versus dead, and they all do it in their own way. Whether I'm a tub of guts, Leslie just pointed out in the chat, he could do so much for me if he just would. She's dealing with creation at the same time,
right?
At the time of this destruction,
right? And
then you have, I think Yasmin started to kind of talk about there, a lot of soliloquy from Darl with the is not, the was not. Like he's a lot of critics will kind of point to Darl as being the philosopher of the novel, and they'll also compare him to the Hamlet of the novel, to be or not to be. After I'm dead, do I go on dreaming? Right. And each of these characters is dealing with that grief in a very strange way. You guys brought up earlier, Cash, right? His way of dealing, with grief when it first started is he's a man of action. I'm going to make this list. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be productive for my family. And then by the end of the book, you guys kind of started to talk about too, it's totally different, Cash, right?
Yeah.
Like he's dealt with it in a very different way. And we see these characters deal with what does death mean to them.
Yeah,
Well, he's
that's
completely. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say that's exactly true. And Noah, you said that Cash and Darl were opposites. And it's interesting because going off of what Una's saying, Cash ends up being the one who understands Darl the most when the book ends, right? He understands that whether someone's insane can depend on the group of people looking and what the majority of people agree on. And then he says something like, this wasn't the place for Darl, so maybe it's for the better that he's not here anymore.
Right.
So just interesting how much Cash changes. I want to know what you guys were looking at because you were laughing.
It's so different how
It's Leslie's comment right here.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put it up on the screen.
I would take the crest with the Bundrins every day.
So I don't know if you can see the banner, but Leslie asked, would you rather join the Fellowship of the Ring to take the One Ring to Mordor or travel this quest with the Bundrins? There was no Samwise for Cash.
That's good.
Yeah. So I think it's so cool how differently Faulkner, it just shows his ability as a writer to come at these problems from such different perspectives. Because, the existential question is handled so differently between every single character. And actually, Dewey Dell, like we had said, is more scared of the baby being born.
The knowledge of the baby, even.
Yeah, knowledge of the baby. She's more scared of that than she is death of her mother.
Oh, yeah.
And
there are characters like Jewel who don't even question their existence much. So Darl says at one point, Jewel's mother is, because Jewel basically doesn't doubt that she still is. So
right.
Jewel is a person who doesn't question those things as much as he does.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's go on. We have a string of scenes where they're just not getting where they need to go. They keep going. They stop in this town because Cash broke his leg with the crossing the river debacle, and Anse has the great idea of pouring cement over it to set it so that it can't move. So they stop in this town. It's been like 7 days.
Oh my God.
Vultures are circling their whole and just on the ride with them because they're dragging this dead body around with them. Everybody can smell it. They go into town. Dewey Dell busts off to a pharmacy to try to find her medicine to abort the baby. It's just a cluster. All right. It's insane and how bad it gets. And there's over and over and over just more and more tragedy and this kind of thing where what's going on? They pour concrete over the cast, and then like the next night, as they keep going towards Jefferson, they hold up. Is it Samson's place? Is it Samson, that one?
Gillespie, yeah.
Gillespie, and they hold up in a barn. Right? There's vultures everywhere, and right then they start to bust the cast off because it's turning Cash's leg black. It's ridiculous. And so it's just really, really messed up. PG says, wow, I got to read this. Right. Yeah, you do, brother. It's crazy. So it's getting to a point where, and now it's been like 8 days, maybe 9 days of just, and Cash is laying on, I just kind of thought of Cash there. Like when they're traveling, he's laying on the coffin. This coffin that smells like
you hear it decomposing.
Yeah, you hear it. They were out there, Vardeman, and then we're out there listening to it decompose within the coffin, saying, "Oh, that's how the angels talk." It's ridiculous and just such good Southern Gothic grotesque stuff, man. I mean, it's just amazing writing and an amazing story. And Faulkner's words are so beautiful. In a lot of these passages, when you're in just a horrific scene, the language is so beautiful, and it draws you and keeps you going.
into what you're talking about with the writing, like why is the writing good? Like one of the ways that I would justify the writing being so good is that you get it from all these perspectives. Like you don't start a scene at a logical beginning and then finish it at a logical conclusion. You start off in the middle of a scene, go through what would be to the middle of a scene normally for any other writer, and then it cuts, right? It cuts over to another character.
Right.
To your point about the fire scene with Gillespie, or Gillespie, I don't know how to pronounce it, I'm sorry. We cut in the middle of it to Vardeman, the viewpoint of a young boy, in a sense, watching this barn burn, watching Jules, again, single-handedly lifting his mother from the flames on his back by himself, getting burnt so that his back is as black as Cash's foot.
Right.
All described by a 6-year-old. And then we cut to another point of view of the neighbor who condemns them, of just, how could you be so freaking stupid to do this? And that's what is just so engaging with Faulkner, is just that constant exploration of viewpoint on a single event.
Yeah, that does lend itself to being able to, for him to go into beautiful descriptions of what's going on, because he can just break you from the horrific feeling of, you know, like Jewel in the fire to Vardeman outside of it, you know, looking at it or something like that. So what happens there, just for everybody, in case you haven't read it or something or whatever, is that Darl actually gets to the end of his rope there. And this thing is so crazy. What is going on with his family? And they're never getting really to where they need to be. It's been 8 or 9 days. He decides to set fire to the barn where the wagon and Addie, the coffin, are in there. And so he just does it. And it just goes up in flames. You know, I mean, it's a freaking barn. There's hay and there's just dry stuff. And then we have Jewel just make the decision to go and not just save Addie, but there's the main reason, but save everybody and save everything. He gets the cows out, he gets the people, he gets the wagon out, and he gets Addie out, the coffin with Addie's body, single-handedly.
And pushes the naked neighbor out of the way to save him too, to add comedy to what a really horrific and crazy scene too.
Right. It's awesome. It's completely awesome.
It is. It really is. And it really parallels the scene when they were crossing the bridge or the river. And again, here Anse is doing absolutely nothing and being the opposite of Jewel. Yeah, because Jewel, we don't really understand why he does the things he does, but he reacts and he gets things done. And then Anse just does not.
Right. And he doesn't even try. He doesn't even try. If he's pressed for it, he'll blame somebody else. You know what I mean? When he didn't even do anything.
Everybody. Yeah, and he seems to be the one who wants to take Addie to Jefferson, at least according to, if we listen to his words. And Jewel is the one who, you know, wasn't for it. But Jewel is the one that's making it happen. And Anse is just the one that's sitting back and watching.
I want like a shirt of Anse where like he's holding a sword, but the sword is just made out of like a paragraph of words he's used when making an excuse, like using his words as a weapon. I would love that.
Like a pointer, like, you know, that the teacher uses for a blackboard, just pointing to the blackboard full of words, saying a bunch of stuff, and he's just pointing at it.
We need to start a Faulkner shirt design.
I'll have Jewel on his horse jumping up on the bank of the river, all majestic. I love Jewel. Team Jewel, baby. So Jewel is a wonderful character that
we didn't talk about Jewel's lineage in this talk, though. We didn't talk about
Jewel's lineage. We can work into it here. I think that first thing I just want to say that Jewel, what we have said is that Jewel is this kind of savior figure for Addie, and it works itself out from her chapter there where she says, "Jewel is my cross
and he
My
will be my
curse
salvation.
and my
He will
salvation.
save me from the water and from the fire. Even though I have laid down my life, he will save me.
That's right. And so we see him save her from the water and from the fire in this. But do you want to say how he was her curse? Go ahead. Drop the
Is that to
bomb,
me?
baby.
To me, or I didn't know who you're
Both.
passing it to. Okay. Well,
Go ahead.
He's the only one that is not his father is not Anse.
Right.
Right. So we learn that after Cash, after Darl, Addie had an affair with Reverend Whitfield. And as a result, I think Yasmin had a really interesting point. I think, Noah, you had a different interpretation where you're like, okay, does Dewey Dell not count as a child? Because we have that quote where Dewey Dell was the negative Jewel. And then we had the quote that Vardeman was the replacement for the child that she was robbed of. And you said, hey,
I first had said that like Dewey Dell was not acknowledged as a kid. And I kind of thought of the way of like, well, maybe because, she's not going to bring anything to the table or something. But it was that kind of thing in the chapter where Jewel was like a black mark on the genealogy or on the, on the kids because he's out of wedlock. He was from an affair. And then that Dewey Dell just made it even again. Not that she was another child. She just made it back even again because Jewel was like a negative one.
Yeah.
So, and then Vardeman brought it back up to a +1 again. And then she was ready to die. She could prepare herself to die.
And I know we're running out of time, but Faulkner also has some commentary there on women of what is the purpose of women in this life.
There's a lot of stuff to be explored in that kind of way. There's a lot more to explore in this story that we haven't even touched on. It's so rich. It's so rich, man.
Can I say something quick about Dewey Dell?
Please.
So Dewey Dell is sort of a character that suffers silently. So we learn that she's pregnant. And we're told when she hooks up with the father, but the father never really shows up. We're not really sure who he is. That's funny. And she wants to get an abortion, but she does all of this without any member of the family finding out, right? And
Darl kind of does, right?
Yeah, okay, Darl kind of does, but she never asks for help. Yeah. I guess that's what I'm getting at. Like all the other problems of like Cash's problem, they're all laid out and the family helps or they can help, right? But Dewey Dell is pregnant and she doesn't want to tell anybody. Darl finds out because he's Darl. But then she tries to get an abortion. She gets into a drugstore and the guy doesn't want to help her. And then she gets into another store. A guy pretends that he is a doctor and rapes her. And then she comes back and she keeps all of that to herself. But
it's such a tragedy. Dewey Dell is such a tragic character.
All of this silently without asking for help. From the family at least. And then she can't because nobody would really accept it or want to help her.
They just chastise her.
Yeah. And then but she still helps people and she does it in small ways. So at the beginning when Addie's dying, that she helps Vardeman a lot and he comes to her for help. But also at the beginning when Addie's dying and she can't speak anymore, Dewey Dell speaks for her. So when Peabody's there, she says something like, Addie doesn't really want you here. And we don't really know if that's what Addie's thinking, but she still helps Addie out in that way.
Know. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And then later on, something that I had told you guys that I noticed is that when Cash throws up, when they're after the river scene, he throws up and she wipes it off with the hem of her dress. And then when they're pouring concrete, she wipes off concrete from the sides, and all of these small things that are really hard to notice, but that she's always there. She's always present, helping, even though nobody really helps her.
Sure.
And everybody, it's interesting when we say nobody helps anyone, but they're all there for each other almost in a sense. Not, you didn't say anybody helps there, but you'll notice too, this is a theme with Faulkner too. You said you read Barn Burning. I don't know how long ago it was, but one of the main thrusts of Barn Burning was that you could go against your father as much as you want or not agree with him, but you'll still feel that pull of blood. You will still feel the pull of family and need to have some type of
belonging. Sure.
Yeah.
And you can see that even with the Bundrens being lower class, they don't have much, but they have Bundrens.
But they have each other as messed up.
In a very weird way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go rub some cement on it, boy. You'll be okay.
So Leslie from the Nerdy Narrative had also another great thing to say here, and it was that Anse had everyone thinking he's taking Addie to Jefferson there. Home Slice was just going to pick up his dentures.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so that speaks to this kind of thing where all these people had their own motivations throughout this whole thing. And at the end of it, we're left with further and further tragedy. It's not going to be pretty for this family. They're going to find out eventually that Dewey Dell is pregnant. Darl is now in a mental institution, and all the better for him. Actually,
he was liberated.
Exactly, like Addie.
Escape the Bundren curse.
Right, and that was said multiple times over and over in this story, at least 3 times. That to be rid of Anse is to win, because he's the one that really is just bringing this family down, because he's just feeding off everybody. He's a user. It sucks. But Jules staying in the game. Jules gonna keep working, and he probably will eventually work his butt off enough to get a new horse and run his life. And he's a good guy. And he's a really a go-getter, resourceful kind of guy, and he's just gonna do his thing. Cash, we can only hope that he gets better and gets functional. But it's a hard road to hoe, and I felt ultimately sorry for Vardeman, because here's the innocent that is being brought up in this and is going to go the way of the Bundren family. So as far as what's your kind of final take on this, I wanted to say, what is your kind of final take on what Faulkner has done with this story? Because he leaves us, the burying of Addie. We didn't even talk about it because it's very anticlimactic. It just happens. Yeah. And then the family just kind of goes on. And what do you think Faulkner is kind of doing with it? And who is your favorite character?
To me, this is the story of As I Lay Dying was the death of Addie, where we see through each of the characters how they are impacted, I think, by her throughout their lives, in terms of Jewel feeling separated. And that's when she was having the affair with a different person, not from that family. And you had Cash, the first one, being hopeful, Darl being confused about what comes next. To me, this wasn't Addie's story. This was the story of Addie's impact on a family.
Right. Like Yasmin said, she was very present throughout this whole thing in the casket. She's
no, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. She's a nexus that everything is.
Yeah, and the characters use her, or Faulkner uses Addie's death as an excuse to talk about each of the characters' troubles and conflicts and internal conflicts and all of that. And when Anse replaces Addie so easily at the end, like, this is the new Mrs., he's just showing that, yes, just how easily replaceable Addie was to him, and just talking about
teeth, and a new wife,
new teeth
a
and
new
new
dolly.
life. Exactly.
Come to Jefferson. You can have it all.
Come on, I got a piece of land and I got kids to work on my stuff for me.
To me, that just shows.
Jesus.
We kind of were talking about how what makes a person, like, what is the essence? Is it what that person experiences? So like, my mother is a fish because the fish went through this, and so did my mother. And the fact that Anse can replace Addie so easily, it's like, who's really Addie? And it's really who she is to every single person. And like I was saying at the beginning, I think that it's just Faulkner trying to say, okay, the truth is all these subjective truths together. So yeah. And
Nice.
in terms of my favorite character, I don't know. I really like Cash and Darl.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. Very cool.
I forgot to do my favorite character. Mine's Cora.
Yeah.
I like how judgmental she is. And she's like wrong about everything too. Yeah.
Cora's
She was great.
I would have never called it.
She's just like, oh, Jewel's so loving, and that evil Darl. Like,
Yeah.
she's so wrong about everything. I love it.
And like when you first meet Cora, like the first chapter or two, when me and Yasmin were reading and talking, we were like, I had said, I go, man, Cora it seems like a really non-judgmental, just totally, really accepting of other people kind of stuff. But that's her own projection that you get first. And then afterwards, you see that like she holds herself like this, and she sees herself as better than everybody because she holds herself like that.
Exactly.
And it's
I saw that at the beginning. I found very pessimistic, but I was reading that, I was thinking, oh no, yeah, she's just gonna be a judgy person.
Yeah. It was, but when it comes down to it, Cora and Addie are two sides of the same coin, right? Whereas it's action over words, and words and action, which and it doesn't really serve that one is right and the other is wrong. You know what I mean? But it's like that words and action play against each other like that. And when it comes down to it, neither of them. I mean, Addie's side of stuff is completely almost a despair. You can't trust anybody. You can't believe anybody in what they say if you undermine their words all the time. And that's what Addie did. And so Cora might be, quote unquote wrong, like, in an extreme view, because she holds that, your words are your savior, and you just have to say it and believe it and like give yourself to it, and might be, an extreme view in one direction, but Addie's an extreme view in the other, and both are, can be.
Well, I love that you said too that your words can be your salvation, because there's also that part in that chapter where they said, well, then salvation's just a word too.
Right.
Yeah.
If sin is just a word, it's Addie's chapter. Addie's chapter is so hardcore. It's so good. And it's so powerful. Addie's chapter, we've touched on Addie's chapter, that one chapter, the most out of all this talk.
Yeah.
And it's one chapter in this whole work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the only one from Addie's chapter. Faulkner is an amazing writer. So I loved it. I'll say that my favorite character is Jewel. Hands down, all the way. I just see Jewel. I see this, he might not be a thinker. He might not be somebody who really understands what he does and knows the reasons behind what he does, but he doesn't second guess himself, and he goes for it. And I love this kind of thing, but it's so hard to pick a favorite, isn't it? I mean, there's so many beautiful different ways of looking, and they're all very real. Faulkner is a genius writer. I can't wait to get to something else. So I think the plan is to get to The Sound and the Fury next. I really want it, so I might throw it in this year for sure. Una, you want to say anything before we close up?
No, No, I thank you guys for spending some time and joining the journey. And Sound and the Fury, we just did that last year, so I don't know
Yeah.
if I'd be able to do that one again so soon, because that's
Cool.
a taxing one. But if you guys do the light in August, man,
Sure. I mean, we'll do it.
I'm
We'll
there.
I might do it before August for sure, so that I can get into whatever we're doing for the light in or Faulkner in August.
Mhm.
If it's the light in August, then maybe I'll.
No, they just did that last year. This year will probably be Sanctuary, I think, unless they change their mind.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Very cool. But yeah, Faulkner, my interest is peaked. And Yasmin, you want to say anything before we get out of here?
No, I'm also going to be getting into Sound and the Fury, and definitely in August.
Party
Yeah.
light in August. Let's do it. Another party,
Let's
guys.
do it.
Yeah.
I'm so
Very
excited.
cool. This was
Well,
really
thank you.
fun. Thank you for the discussion, guys. And everybody, BookTube, bye-bye. Have fun.